Ethan Parker hated quiet houses, not because they were peaceful, because silence reminded him of everything that used to exist inside them. Laughter, arguments, tiny footsteps racing through hallways, late-night conversations that felt important at the time. Now, most nights, his little home in the suburbs of Seattle sounded empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of rain against the windows. And honestly, he had gotten used to it. At 38 years old, Ethan's life had become predictable in the safest possible way. Wake up, get Lily ready for school, work long hours as a contractor, pick Lily up, make dinner, fight bedtime, repeat. There wasn't room for surprises anymore, especially not emotional ones. That night had started exactly the same. Dad, 7-year-old. Lily groaned dramatically from the couch. If I brush my teeth extra good, can I skip bedtime? Ethan folded his arms. Nice try. What if I clean my room tomorrow? Nope. What if I become president someday? He laughed softly. Still no. Lily flopped backward against the couch cushions like life had officially betrayed her. You're the strictest dad ever. That's funny, Ethan replied. Yesterday you told me I was the best dad ever. That was before bedtime. Ethan shook his head, smiling despite himself. Moments like this saved him. People always talked about parenting like it was some magical experience full of inspirational speeches and perfect memories. Most days it was exhaustion, microwave dinners, and trying not to lose your mind over missing socks. But Lily made the chaos worth it. She had her mother's smile, though Ethan tried not to think about that too often. After finally getting Lily upstairs and tucked into bed, Ethan walked quietly through the hallway, turning off lights one by one. Outside, rain poured steadily across the neighborhood. The storm had started earlier that evening and showed no sign of stopping. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down heavily on the couch, enjoying the rare silence. Then, knock, knock. Knock. Ethan frowned. Almost midnight. Nobody visited at midnight unless something was wrong. He stood slowly and walked toward the front door. Another knock came, softer this time. When Ethan opened the door, he froze. Claire Dawson stood on the porch, soaked from the rain. Her oversized gray sweater clung slightly at the sleeves, and strands of wet blonde hair stuck to her face. But it wasn't the rain that caught Ethan off guard. It was her expression. Exhausted, not crying, not dramatic, just empty. 3 days earlier, the entire neighborhood had stood around a cemetery watching Claire bury her husband Daniel. Daniel Dawson had been one of those people everyone liked instantly. Friendly, funny. The kind of man who remembered birthdays and always helped shovel snow from elderly neighbors' driveways before they even asked. A sudden heart attack at 42 had shocked the entire neighborhood. Even now, Ethan still couldn't fully believe it. Claire looked down awkwardly. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know it's late. Ethan immediately stepped aside. No, it's okay. Come in. She hesitated briefly before walking inside. Rainwater dripped softly onto the hardwood floor. I can clean that. Forget the floor. Claire held a glass container against her chest. Someone brought lasagna earlier, she explained awkwardly. I figured if I stayed alone any longer, I might actually lose my mind. Ethan nodded slowly. I get that. And he did. Maybe not exactly her kind of grief. But loneliness? Yeah. He understood loneliness perfectly. Claire glanced around the house quietly. Warm lights. A pair of tiny shoes near the stairs. Family photos hanging crookedly on the wall. The kind of home that looked lived in. Real. It smells nice in here, she said softly. Ethan smirked. That's probably because Lily spilled vanilla candles everywhere earlier. Claire laughed unexpectedly. A small laugh. But real. And somehow that tiny sound changed the energy in the room instantly. Ethan noticed it too. She asleep? Claire asked. Finally, Ethan replied. Took negotiations worthy of international diplomacy. Another soft laugh escaped her. For the first time since opening the door, Ethan saw something besides grief on her face. He pointed toward the kitchen. You want coffee? It's midnight. Exactly. Claire smiled faintly. Then yes. A few minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table while rain rattled against the windows. For a while, neither of them spoke. Not because it was awkward, because both of them were too tired to pretend. Claire stared down at her coffee cup. People keep showing up at my house. Ethan listened quietly. They bring food, flowers, sympathy cards. She swallowed hard. But every conversation feels the same. I'm sorry. They look at me like I'm fragile, she whispered, like I might shatter if anyone says the wrong thing. Ethan leaned back slightly. That's because most people are terrified of grief. Claire looked up. What do you mean? They don't know how to fix it, Ethan said honestly. So they panic and start acting weird. That earned him another tiny smile. You're weirdly good at this. I'm not. You are. Ethan shrugged. I think people just want honesty more than perfect words. Claire stared at him for a second longer than expected. Then she quietly admitted something that surprised even her. I didn't want to stay in that house tonight. The confession hung heavily in the air. Ethan understood immediately. Sometimes walls carried memories too loudly. The empty chair, the untouched coffee mug, the silence on the other side of the bed. Grief lived in ordinary objects, and sometimes it became unbearable. You don't have to explain, Ethan said gently. Claire nodded slowly, clearly relieved he understood. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway photos again. One picture caught her attention. Ethan and Lily standing on a beach laughing while wind blew through Lily's hair. Claire smiled softly. She looks happy. She usually is, Ethan replied. And you? That question hit harder than expected. Ethan looked down at his coffee briefly before answering. I'm trying. Claire nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. Because maybe she did. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sky. The storm seemed endless tonight. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I used to hate rain, she admitted quietly. Used to? Daniel loved storms. A sad smile crossed her face. He'd sit on the porch like some psycho watching lightning. Ethan laughed softly. That does sound slightly insane. He said storms made life feel dramatic. Was he always like that? All the time. For the first time all night, Claire's expression softened naturally instead of painfully. And Ethan realized something important. She didn't need someone to avoid talking about Daniel. She needed someone willing to remember him normally, not like a tragedy, like a person. What was the dumbest thing he ever did? Ethan asked suddenly. Claire blinked in surprise. Then she laughed, a real laugh this time. Oh my God, where do I start? And just like that, the atmosphere shifted completely. For the next hour, Claire told story after story, Daniel trying to deep fry a turkey and nearly setting the backyard on fire. Daniel insisting he could build furniture without instructions. Daniel accidentally adopting the world's angriest cat for 3 miserable weeks. Ethan laughed harder than he had in months. And Claire finally stopped looking like someone drowning. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked softly. Neither adult noticed. But halfway down the staircase, Lily sat quietly wrapped in her blanket, listening carefully. She watched Claire laugh from the kitchen, and children noticed things adults missed, especially sadness. Lily had seen Claire crying at the funeral, seen the dark house next door, seen the way neighbors whispered softly around her now. But tonight felt different. Claire didn't look broken anymore. Not completely. Eventually, Claire glanced toward the clock and sighed. It's really late. Probably. I should go. But neither of them moved immediately, because somehow, without either person expecting it, the lonely silence both of them had been carrying felt lighter tonight. Claire stood slowly and picked up the empty lasagna dish. You know, she said quietly, this is the first normal conversation I've had all week. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter. Glad I could provide world-class emotional support and bad coffee. Claire smiled warmly. The coffee was terrible. Wow. Okay. She laughed again, and Ethan realized something dangerous in that moment. He had missed hearing another adult laugh inside this house, missed connection, missed warmth, missed feeling understood without needing to explain every detail. Claire walked toward the front door. Ethan opened it for her as cool rain air drifted inside. Before stepping outside, she turned back toward him. "Thank you," she said softly. Not politely, not casually. Honestly. Ethan nodded once. "Anytime." Claire disappeared into the rain toward the dark house next door. Ethan watched until her porch light turned on. Then he quietly closed the door behind him. Upstairs, Lily peeked over the railing. "Dad?" Ethan looked up. "You're supposed to be asleep." Lily ignored that completely. She smiled again. Ethan paused, then slowly looked toward the window facing Claire's house. Yeah, she did. And for the first time in a very long time, the neighborhood next door didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. The next morning, Ethan Parker woke to a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Laughter. Not the loud, chaotic kind that usually came from Lily watching cartoons before school. This was softer, warmer, and strangely comforting. Half asleep, Ethan rubbed his eyes and glanced toward the clock. 8:17 a.m. Too early for happiness. He groaned, threw on a gray hoodie, and walked downstairs expecting complete disaster. Instead, he froze halfway into the kitchen. Claire Dawson stood at the stove flipping pancakes while Lily sat on the counter wearing unicorn pajamas and laughing so hard she nearly dropped a chocolate chip onto the floor. The smell of vanilla and butter filled the entire house. Claire looked over her shoulder casually. "Oh, good," she said. "The homeowner is awake." Ethan blinked several times. "What is happening?" Lily gasped dramatically. "Dad, she makes real pancakes." "I make real pancakes." "No," Lily corrected seriously. "You make emergency pancakes." Claire burst out laughing. Ethan pointed accusingly toward his daughter. "You are unbelievably disrespectful before 9 a.m. Lily shrugged proudly. Claire flipped another pancake onto a plate before looking back at Ethan. "She invited me in." Ethan raised an eyebrow at Lily. "You opened the door?" "She knew the password." Claire smiled innocently. "Your daughter informed me the secret code is 3 aggressive knocks and bringing food." That does sound like our security system. For the first time in months, the kitchen didn't feel like a place built entirely around routine. It felt alive. Sunlight poured through the windows while rain from the night before still dripped from tree branches outside. Claire moved naturally around the kitchen now, like someone finally relaxing after holding her breath too long. Ethan noticed it immediately. Last night she had looked exhausted. Today she looked lighter. Still sat underneath it all, sure, but lighter. He sat down at the counter while Claire placed pancakes in front of him. Ethan took one bite and stared at her. "These are annoyingly good," Claire smirked proudly. "Thank you," Lily pointed at Ethan dramatically. "See? Dad burns the edges because he gets distracted. I multitask. You forget things. I prefer the word improvise." Claire laughed again. And Ethan realized something dangerous. He liked hearing that sound far more than he should. For a moment, the scene felt almost normal. Not romantic, not dramatic, just comfortable. Like 3 people accidentally sharing peace together. Then Ethan caught himself thinking something he hadn't allowed in years. This feels nice. And honestly, that thought scared him a little. After breakfast, Lily dragged Claire toward the dining table with the unstoppable energy only children possessed. "Wait!" Lily shouted. "You promised to help me finish my school project." Claire looked helplessly toward Ethan. "Did I?" "You absolutely did," Lily confirmed. Within minutes, the entire dining table disappeared beneath colored paper, markers, glitter, glue sticks, and what looked like several violations of basic cleaning laws. Ethan leaned against the doorway holding coffee while watching the chaos unfold. Claire helped Lily cut shapes carefully while listening to a very serious explanation about second-grade classroom politics. "And Madison thinks she's in charge," Lily whispered dramatically. "But honestly, she's kind of rude." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Every office has a Madison." Ethan laughed into his coffee. "See?" Claire told Lily. "Adults survive them too." Hours passed faster than Ethan expected. At some point, he realized something strange. The house sounded different today. Not physically, emotionally. For years, Ethan had built his life around survival. Wake up, work, parent, sleep, repeat, everything organized. Everything controlled. Because control kept things from falling apart. But this messy kitchen full of laughter and glitter somehow felt better than control. It felt human. Claire suddenly looked up from the project. What? Ethan blinked. What? You've been staring at us for 5 minutes. I have not. You absolutely have, Claire teased. Lily nodded immediately. It's weird. Ethan rolled his eyes. Traitors, both of you. Claire smiled softly before returning to the project, and for a brief second, Ethan forgot she was technically his grieving neighbor. She just looked like someone who belonged here. That realization hit harder than expected. Around noon, Claire offered to make grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. Ethan watched her moving comfortably through the kitchen again. You know, he said carefully, you don't have to keep pretending you're okay. Claire paused. The room quieted slightly. Then she looked back at him honestly. I know, but, she sighed softly, but if I stay alone in that house too long, everything gets loud. Ethan understood immediately. Memories had volume, and empty houses echoed. Claire leaned against the counter. Last night was the first time I slept more than 3 hours all week. That hit Ethan harder than expected too, because he remembered those nights after his ex-wife left. The silence, the confusion, the constant replaying of every mistake inside your head. Loneliness could make even simple things feel unbearable. Lily interrupted the heavy moment by holding up a glitter-covered cardboard volcano. We made art. Ethan stared at it carefully. I think that might actually be a biohazard. It's creativity, Claire corrected. No, Ethan said seriously. That glitter is going to survive longer than humanity. Claire laughed again. And Ethan noticed it now. Every laugh came easier than the last one. By late afternoon, the rain clouds finally cleared completely. Golden sunlight washed across the neighborhood while children rode bikes down the sidewalks. Lily immediately begged to go outside. 10 minutes later, Ethan stood in the front yard watching Lily chase bubbles Claire blew across the lawn. The scene looked almost cinematic. Warm sunlight, summer breeze, laughter floating through the quiet suburban street. And naturally, that's when the neighbors started staring. Mrs. Peterson slowed while walking her dog. 2 women across the street whispered quietly near a mailbox. A man mowing his lawn glanced over longer than necessary. Ethan saw it instantly. Curiosity, judgment, speculation. Claire noticed too. Her smile faded almost immediately. The bubble wand lowered slowly in her hand. Ethan felt irritation rise in his chest. People loved tragedy when it stayed neat and predictable. Widows were supposed to stay sad longer, supposed to isolate, supposed to perform grief correctly for everyone else's comfort. Claire looked down awkwardly. I should probably head home. Ethan frowned. Why? She forced a small smile. You know why. Ethan glanced toward the watching neighbors again, then back at Claire. Or, he said calmly, you could stop caring what people think. Claire gave him an almost amused look. You make that sound easy. It's not easy, Ethan admitted. But lonely people waste too much time trying to make everybody else comfortable. Claire stared at him quietly after that. Because maybe nobody had spoken to her that honestly since the funeral. Most people treated grief like fragile glass. Ethan treated her like a person. There was a difference. Lily suddenly ran over holding bubbles everywhere. Claire, you can't leave yet! We didn't make dessert. Claire laughed softly. You plan dessert too? Lily nodded proudly. I believe in snacks. Ethan pointed toward his daughter. That's the smartest thing anyone said all week. Claire shook her head, smiling. And slowly, the tension disappeared again. That evening, the 3 of them baked cookies together while music played softly in the background. Flour somehow ended up everywhere. Lily got chocolate on her face. Ethan nearly dropped an entire tray onto the floor. Claire laughed so hard at one point she had to hold the kitchen counter to breathe. And for one tiny moment, she forgot to feel guilty about being happy. That realization hit her unexpectedly hard. Because after Daniel died, every small moment of joy felt wrong somehow. Like smiling meant she loved him less. Like laughing meant she was moving on too fast. But sitting here inside this loud, messy kitchen, nothing about it felt disrespectful. It just felt alive. Later that night, after Lily finally fell asleep from complete sugar exhaustion, Claire stood near the front door, getting ready to leave. The house had gone quiet again. But not lonely quiet, comfortable quiet. Claire looked at Ethan carefully. You know something? What? I didn't think I'd laugh again this week. Ethan leaned against the wall casually. Your standards were low. My pancake trauma alone should have entertained you. Claire smiled warmly. You really do this on purpose, don't you? Do what? Make people feel normal again. Ethan looked away briefly before answering. No, he admitted quietly. I just know what it feels like when nobody does. That answer stayed between them for a moment. Heavy, honest, real. Claire stepped a little closer. Not dramatically, not romantically, just close enough to matter. Thank you, she whispered softly. Ethan nodded once. Outside, the neighborhood had gone dark and quiet beneath the cool evening sky. Claire opened the front door slowly, then paused. You know, she said with a faint smile, Lily's right. About what? You really do burn pancakes? Ethan stared at her in betrayal. Claire laughed all the way across the lawn toward her house, and Ethan stood there smiling like an idiot long after she disappeared inside. Because for the first time in years, his home didn't just feel lived in, it felt warm again. By the third week, the neighborhood had officially started talking. Not quietly either. Suburban neighborhoods had a strange way of pretending to be friendly while secretly operating like reality television. Everyone waved, everyone smiled, and everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. Ethan Parker realized the rumors had started the moment he walked into Miller's coffee house on a cold Thursday morning. The place smelled like roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries, with soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Normally, Ethan liked it here. Today, not so much. He had barely stepped inside before conversations lowered slightly around him. That was always the first sign, people trying not to look obvious. Mrs. Henderson stood near the counter, pretending to scroll through her phone while clearly listening to everything nearby. Two men in business jackets whispered at a corner table. And then Ethan heard it. Claire sure spends a lot of time over there now. Another voice answered quietly. Her husband's barely been gone a month. Someone sighed dramatically. Well, people cope differently. Ethan stopped walking. Every muscle in his body tightened instantly. Not because the gossip surprised him, because it annoyed him how predictable people were. Nobody cared when Claire sat alone in a dark house crying every night. But the second she laughed again, suddenly everybody had opinions. Ethan ordered his coffee silently and tried ignoring the whispers. Didn't work. She probably just doesn't want to be alone. Still looks strange. I just feel bad for Daniel. That one did it. Ethan turned around slowly. The entire coffee shop became awkwardly quiet. Mrs. Henderson suddenly became extremely interested in her muffin. Ethan kept his voice calm. You know what's weird? He said evenly. Nobody answered. Watching someone survive the worst month of their life and somehow making it about gossip. Silence. One of the men cleared his throat awkwardly. We didn't mean... No, Ethan interrupted calmly. You did. The room stayed painfully quiet after that. Ethan grabbed his coffee and walked out before his irritation turned into something worse. Outside, freezing air hit his face immediately. He stood there for a moment, breathing slowly. Honestly, he shouldn't have cared this much. But he did. Because Claire had spent weeks barely holding herself together. And now that she was finally starting to smile again, people wanted to punish her for it. That didn't sit right with him. Not at all. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned home exhausted after work. Clouds covered the sky again, giving the neighborhood that dull gray look Seattle seemed famous for. He had barely stepped onto his porch when he noticed Claire standing near her front yard. Even from a distance, something looked wrong. Her posture, the way she held her arms tightly across her chest, the expression on her face. Ethan walked over immediately. You okay? Claire forced a smile so fake it almost hurt to watch. Fantastic. Ah, Ethan nodded. So definitely not okay. That earned the tiniest reaction from her. Barely. Claire exhaled shakily. My mother-in-law came over. Ethan instantly understood. That bad? Claire laughed once without humor. She brought casseroles and judgment. Very efficient combination. Ethan leaned quietly against the porch railing while she stared out toward the street. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire finally said the thing really bothering her. She thinks I'm embarrassing Daniel's memory. Ethan frowned slightly. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. She said people are talking about me spending time here. There it was. The rumors had officially reached her, too. Claire looked down at her hands. She actually asked me if I was trying to replace him. Ethan felt anger rise in his chest again. But this time it wasn't toward random neighbors. It was toward the impossible expectations people placed on grief, as if widows were supposed to stop being human for a certain amount of time. As if loneliness had rules. That's ridiculous, Ethan said firmly. Claire shrugged weakly. Maybe. No, not maybe. She looked at him quietly. Ethan continued carefully. People get uncomfortable when grief stops looking tragic. Claire's eyes softened slightly. They think if you smile again, you must not have loved the person enough. That sentence hung heavily between them. Because honestly, that was exactly what scared Claire most. Not losing Daniel. That had already happened. The terrifying part was realizing life kept moving afterward. And worse, part of her wanted to move with it. Claire leaned against the porch railing beside him. I feel guilty every time I laugh lately. Ethan looked toward her calmly. Why? Because sometimes I forget for a few minutes. Forget what? That he's gone. The honesty in her voice hurt. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment before answering carefully. You know, nobody stops loving someone just because they smile again, right? Claire looked unconvinced. My mother-in-law seems pretty sure. Ethan shook his head slowly. No one forgets someone they truly loved. Claire stared at him after that. Really stared, like she was trying to decide whether she believed him. And honestly, part of Ethan understood why she struggled with it. Grief did strange things to people. It made happiness feel disloyal. It made survival feel selfish. At that exact moment, the front door behind Ethan burst open. Lily sprinted outside, holding markers and construction paper. Claire! She shouted excitedly. I finished it. Claire blinked. Finished what? My drawing. Without waiting for permission, Lily shoved the paper proudly into Claire's hands. Claire looked down, then froze. The drawing showed 3 badly sketched figures standing under an enormous rainbow. One was clearly Lily, one was Ethan, and the third figure had bright yellow hair. Claire. At the top, written in giant, uneven letters, were the words, My favorite people. Claire's throat tightened instantly. You drew me. Lily looked confused by the question. Well, yeah. Claire glanced toward Ethan briefly before looking back at the drawing. Why? Lily shrugged like the answer was obvious. Because you're here all the time now. Children had a brutal talent for honesty. Claire suddenly felt emotional for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Not sad emotional, something deeper. Because without realizing it, she had slowly become part of this house. Part of these moments, part of their routine. And somewhere along the way, the emptiness inside her life had gotten smaller. Claire crouched down slightly toward Lily. This is beautiful. Lily grinned proudly. I know. Ethan laughed softly. Humility skipped this generation, apparently. Lily ignored him completely. Claire looked back at the drawing again. Then at Ethan, then at the warm light glowing through his front windows behind them. And suddenly she understood why going home every night felt harder lately. Because next door wasn't just quieter, it was emptier. That realization scared her more than she expected. That evening, Claire stayed for dinner. Not because anyone formally invited her anymore. It just happened naturally now. Lily did homework at the table while Ethan cooked pasta badly, and Claire corrected his seasoning choices every 5 minutes. You use garlic like you're angry at vampires, Claire complained. It's called flavor. It's called a medical emergency. Lily giggled loudly from the table. The entire scene felt easy, comfortable, dangerously normal. At one point, Ethan caught Claire smiling while watching Lily talk non-stop about school drama. And for a brief second, Ethan forgot to guard himself emotionally. Because Claire looked beautiful when she forgot to be sad. That thought hit him immediately afterward. Dangerous thought. Very dangerous thought. Ethan focused aggressively on pasta after that. Later, after dinner ended and Lily disappeared upstairs for bed, Claire helped Ethan clean dishes quietly. Warm water ran softly while music played low from a nearby speaker. The atmosphere between them had shifted lately. Subtle, but noticeable. Less awkwardness, longer conversations, comfortable silences. Claire handed Ethan a plate slowly. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you really helping me? The question caught him off guard. Ethan dried the plate carefully before answering. Because somebody should. That's not a real answer. He sighed softly, then finally admitted the truth. Because I know what loneliness feels like when it gets too loud. Claire went quiet after that. Ethan rarely talked about his divorce, not because he hated discussing it, because he hated remembering how badly it broke him afterward. The silence, the embarrassment, the feeling that everybody else kept living normally while your entire world quietly collapsed. Claire studied him carefully. You hide it well. So do you. That earned her first genuine smile all evening. Outside, rain started falling lightly again against the windows. Seattle never stayed dry for long. Claire looked toward the dark backyard. You know something weird? What? For the first time since the funeral, I'm not counting the hours anymore. Ethan understood exactly what she meant. The first weeks after loss always moved strangely. Every minute dragged painfully. Every day felt endless. But eventually life interrupted grief in tiny ways. A laugh, a conversation, a moment of peace. And suddenly time started moving again. Claire looked back toward him softly. I think I'm starting to feel alive again. Ethan's chest tightened slightly hearing her say it. Because despite the gossip, despite the judgment, that was actually a beautiful thing. And deep down, he was glad he got to witness it. The storm rolled into Seattle just after sunset. By 8 o'clock, rain hammered against rooftops hard enough to shake windows, and the wind bent trees like they were trying to escape the ground. Lily loved storms. At least usually she did. But tonight was different. The thunder sounded louder, closer, the kind that rattled the entire house before disappearing into the sky again. Ethan Parker stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes while Lily sat curled up on the couch pretending she wasn't nervous. Every time lightning flashed outside, her eyes flicked toward the windows. You okay over there? Ethan asked casually. I'm fine, Lily answered way too quickly. Thunder exploded again. Lily nearly jumped off the couch. Ethan smirked. So, definitely fine. I just don't like this storm. There's a difference? Yes, she said seriously. This one sounds angry. Before Ethan could answer, the lights flickered once, twice. Then the entire house went black. Lily gasped immediately. Dad! It's okay, Ethan said calmly, though honestly the timing felt straight out of a horror movie. Outside, rain crashed against the house, while darkness swallowed the neighborhood completely. Only occasional lightning illuminated the windows now. Ethan grabbed his phone flashlight. Power's probably out on the whole block. Another loud crack of thunder shook the walls. Lily moved closer instantly. Okay, Ethan admitted. That one was a little dramatic. Then, bang, bang, bang. Someone pounded urgently on the front door. Lily froze. Ethan frowned immediately. Nobody knocked like that unless something was wrong. He walked quickly toward the door and opened it. Claire Dawson stood outside completely soaked. Rainwater dripped from her hair and sweater while wind whipped violently across the porch behind her. But her expression wasn't panicked. It was concerned. Lily called me, she said breathlessly. Ethan blinked. She what? Inside the dark living room, Lily slowly lowered Ethan's old emergency flashlight guiltily. Claire looked past Ethan toward her. She said the thunder was scary. Lily crossed her arms defensively. It was an emergency. Ethan stared at his daughter in disbelief. You called Claire before me? She answers faster. Claire burst out laughing despite the storm. Even Ethan couldn't help smiling. Wow, he muttered. I've officially been replaced. Another crash of thunder echoed outside. Lily immediately ran toward Claire. Without hesitation, Claire wrapped a blanket around both of them and sat beside her on the couch. It's okay, she whispered gently. I hate storms too. Lily looked surprised. You do? Claire nodded seriously. When I was little, I thought thunder meant giants were fighting in the clouds. Lily's eyes widened. That's actually kind of cool. See? Claire smiled. Terrifying, but cool. Ethan stood there watching them quietly for a second longer than necessary. The candlelight from the kitchen flickered softly across the room while rain pounded outside. And suddenly the house didn't feel dark anymore. It felt warm. A few minutes later, Ethan lit several candles around the living room while Claire helped Lily build what she called an emergency storm blanket fort, which apparently required every pillow in existence. This seems excessive, Ethan observed. Lily pointed dramatically. Survival is not excessive. Claire nodded in agreement. She's right. Great, Ethan sighed. Now there are two of you. By 9 o'clock, the power still hadn't returned. The storm outside only grew worse. Wind screamed against the windows while tree branches scraped across rooftops nearby. But inside the living room, the atmosphere had completely changed. Lily sat inside the blanket fort eating popcorn while Claire and Ethan leaned against opposite sides of the couch. Candles cast soft golden light across the room. It almost felt peaceful. Almost. You know, Claire said thoughtfully, this is probably the most fun power outage I've ever had. That's because you're not the one paying for all these future therapy bills, Ethan replied. Lily popped her head out of the fort immediately. I heard that, Claire laughed softly. There it was again. That laugh. Easier now. Natural. Like her body was finally remembering happiness without needing permission first. Ethan noticed it every single time. And honestly, that scared him a little. Because the more Claire smiled around him, the harder it became to ignore how much he liked having her here. Another loud thunderclap shook the windows. Lily immediately grabbed Claire's arm. Claire squeezed her hand reassuringly. You want to know a secret? She whispered. What? When adults act calm during storms. Lily leaned closer dramatically. We're usually pretending. Lily burst out laughing. Ethan pointed toward Claire accusingly. You are destroying my image as a fearless father. You burned pancakes, Claire replied. The image was already weak. Even Lily nearly fell over laughing at that. The room grew quieter afterward. Not awkward quiet, comfortable quiet, the kind people only shared when they stopped trying so hard around each other. Outside, lightning flashed bright enough to illuminate the entire room. Claire looked toward the window silently for a moment. Then her expression shifted slightly, subtle, but Ethan noticed immediately. You okay? Claire hesitated, then looked back down at the candle flame flickering between them. Can I tell you something terrible? Ethan's chest tightened slightly. You can tell me anything. Claire swallowed slowly before speaking. Daniel and I weren't really happy before he died. The room suddenly felt smaller. Rain continued crashing outside while Ethan stayed completely silent. Not judging, just listening. Claire stared at her hands. We loved each other once, she continued quietly. A lot. Her voice cracked slightly. But the last year, she exhaled shakily. It felt like we were roommates pretending everything was still okay. Ethan didn't interrupt. Claire laughed once bitterly. And now I feel guilty even saying that out loud. Another flash of lightning crossed the room. I spent weeks acting like I lost the perfect marriage, she admitted softly. But honestly, part of me felt lonely long before the funeral. There it was. The truth she'd been terrified to say. Not because she didn't love Daniel. Because loving someone complicated was harder to explain. Claire wiped quickly beneath her eyes before tears could fully fall. I know how horrible that sounds. It doesn't sound horrible, Ethan said immediately. She looked unconvinced. It sounds human. Claire stared at him quietly. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Losing someone complicated doesn't make your grief fake. The words hit her hard. Hard enough that she stopped breathing for half a second. Because nobody had said that to her before. Not the neighbors, not her family, not even herself. Everyone wanted grief to fit into clean little boxes. Soulmates, perfect love, beautiful memories. But real relationships weren't always neat. Sometimes people loved each other deeply and still felt lonely together. Sometimes marriages struggled. Sometimes people drifted apart while still caring. And death didn't magically erase those truths. Claire's eyes filled slightly again. But this time the emotion looked different. Not shame, relief. You really believe that? She whispered. I know it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside softened slightly, though rain still tapped steadily against the windows. Inside the blanket fort, Lily had finally fallen asleep, clutching a flashlight like a tiny exhausted warrior. Claire noticed first and smiled softly. She's adorable. She's exhausting. You say that lovingly. Usually. Claire laughed quietly again. Then her expression softened as she watched Lily sleeping peacefully nearby. You're a good dad, Ethan. The compliment caught him off guard. He looked down awkwardly. I'm trying. You always say that. Because it's true. Claire studied him carefully in the candlelight. You know, most people pretend they have life figured out. Sounds exhausting. It is. Another comfortable silence settled between them. The kind that no longer needed constant conversation to survive. Then Claire said something unexpected. I was scared to come here tonight. Ethan frowned slightly. Why? Because lately, she hesitated carefully. This house feels safer than mine. That confession landed heavily between them, because Ethan understood exactly what she meant. Her house held ghosts now, memories, silence, pain, but here, there was laughter, noise, life. Claire looked embarrassed immediately after admitting it. I know that sounds strange. No, Ethan said softly. It doesn't. Their eyes held for a second longer than either intended. And suddenly the atmosphere shifted again. Subtle, but undeniable. Not friendship exactly. Something quieter, more dangerous. A connection neither of them fully understood yet. Then Lily snored loudly inside the blanket fort. The moment shattered instantly. Claire burst into laughter while Ethan covered his face. Well, he sighed dramatically. Romance officially murdered by tiny human. Claire laughed harder than she had all night. And honestly, Ethan would have listened to that sound forever if he could. Around midnight, the storm finally started calming down. Rain softened to a gentle rhythm against the windows while distant thunder faded further away. The power still hadn't returned, but nobody seemed in a hurry anymore. Claire sat curled beneath a blanket on one side of the couch while Ethan rested opposite her. Lily remained asleep nearby, surrounded by pillows. The room glowed softly beneath candlelight. Peaceful, warm, real. Claire looked toward Ethan quietly. You know something strange? What? 2 months changed everything. Not in dramatic movie-style ways. No giant speeches. No sudden miracles. Just small, quiet changes that slowly transformed everyday life. The curtains in Claire Dawson's house stayed open now. Music played through her kitchen windows again. Fresh flowers appeared beside her front steps every Sunday morning. And almost every evening, one loud 7-year-old sprinted across the lawn yelling, Claire, come outside! Honestly, the entire neighborhood noticed the difference, even the people who used to gossip, because grief had once turned Claire's home into the saddest house on the block. Dark windows, silent rooms, a porch light that barely turned on anymore. Now it looked alive again. And Ethan Parker noticed something else too. He looked forward to seeing her every day. That realization had become impossible to ignore lately. At first, Claire had just been someone needing support. Then she became part of the routine. Coffee, dinner, helping Lily with homework, movie nights that accidentally lasted too late. But somewhere along the way, Ethan stopped thinking of Claire as the grieving woman next door. She had become important, and honestly, that terrified him more than he expected. Because the last time Ethan let someone become important, it nearly destroyed him. One warm Sunday evening, golden sunset light covered the neighborhood while Lily chased fireflies across the yard with a mason jar. Claire sat beside Ethan on the porch steps, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. Summer air drifted softly through the trees while distant laughter echoed from nearby houses. For once, the entire neighborhood felt peaceful. Lily ran across the grass dramatically. I caught one. No, you didn't, Ethan called back. Yes, I did. You caught a leaf? Lily looked into the jar carefully. I hate this game. Claire laughed beside him. There it was again. That laugh. Easy now, natural, nothing forced about it anymore. Ethan glanced toward her without meaning to. The sunset caught softly in her blonde hair while warm porch light glowed behind her. And suddenly it hit him harder than ever before. She looked happy. Not perfectly healed, not magically fixed, just genuinely alive again. Claire noticed him staring immediately. What? Ethan blinked. Nothing. You've been doing that a lot lately. Doing what? Looking at me like you forgot your own thoughts. Ethan nearly choked on his lemonade. Claire laughed harder. Relax, she teased. I'm kidding. The problem was, he wasn't entirely sure she was. A comfortable silence settled between them while Lily continued her aggressive battle against innocent insects nearby. Claire leaned back slightly against the porch railing. You know what scares me? Ethan looked toward her. What? She hesitated. Then finally admitted quietly. Being happy again. The honesty in her voice immediately caught his attention. Claire stared out toward the street while speaking softly. After Daniel died, I thought grief would feel like sadness forever. Ethan listened quietly. But lately, she swallowed slightly. Sometimes I wake up okay. A breeze moved gently through the yard. Claire continued carefully. and then I feel guilty for it. There it was again. That same fear she'd been carrying for weeks. The fear that healing somehow meant forgetting. Ethan leaned back thoughtfully before answering. I think people confuse moving forward with moving on. Claire looked at him. What's the difference? Moving on sounds like leaving someone behind, Ethan explained softly. Moving forward means carrying them with you while still living your life. Claire stayed quiet after that, because somehow Ethan always found words that made complicated feelings sound simpler. You really believe that? She asked. Ethan nodded once. I think the people we lose would hate seeing us miserable forever. Claire smiled faintly. That sounds like something Daniel would say. Ethan's chest tightened slightly hearing his name. Not from jealousy. Oddly enough, that wasn't the feeling. Because Daniel wasn't some shadow standing between them anymore. He was part of Claire's story. Part of the woman sitting beside him now. And Ethan realized something important lately. He wasn't trying to replace anyone. Neither of them were. Life wasn't that simple. Lily suddenly sprinted toward the porch holding her jar triumphantly. I got one! Ethan looked inside carefully. Okay, wow, he admitted. That's actually impressive. Lily grinned proudly. I'm basically nature police. Claire burst out laughing again. Then Lily looked between them suspiciously. You guys smile at each other a lot? Ethan immediately coughed. Claire covered her face laughing. Children are terrifying, Ethan muttered. I'm observant, Lily corrected proudly. Before either adult could recover, she sprinted back toward the yard again. Claire shook her head, smiling. She's too smart. That's the problem. The porch grew quieter afterward. Streetlights slowly flickered on while cicadas buzzed softly in the distance. And for the first time all evening, neither Ethan nor Claire seemed eager to break the silence. Because the atmosphere between them had changed again lately. Subtle, but undeniable. Longer eye contact, smaller distances, moments that lingered slightly too long. Neither person had talked about it directly yet, probably because both of them were scared to ruin whatever this was becoming. Claire looked toward Ethan quietly. Can I tell you something embarrassing? Always. She smiled softly before speaking. The first night I knocked on your door, Ethan listened carefully. I almost turned around and went home 3 different times. Really? Claire nodded. I kept thinking I was bothering you. Ethan laughed softly. You brought lasagna. That automatically qualified you as my favorite person. Claire smiled wider. Then her expression softened again. But honestly, she admitted quietly, I think I knew I didn't want to be alone anymore. That sentence landed heavily between them. Because Ethan understood it perfectly. Loneliness changed people. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, until even small moments of connection started feeling life-saving. Claire looked down at her lemonade glass thoughtfully. You know what's strange? What? I spent weeks thinking grief meant losing Daniel. Her voice stayed calm now, steady. But eventually I realized. She looked toward Ethan carefully. The hardest part was losing the version of myself that existed before everything happened. Ethan felt that sentence deep in his chest. Because he understood that too. Heartbreak didn't just take people away. Sometimes it took pieces of you with them. Claire smiled faintly. And somehow, you and Lily helped me find myself again. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he told the truth. You did the same thing for us. Claire's eyes softened instantly. Before she could answer, Lily's voice exploded across the yard again. Stop having emotional conversations without me. Both adults burst into laughter immediately. Lily marched toward the porch, dramatically holding her firefly jar. You guys always get quiet and weird lately. Ethan pointed toward the house. Bedtime. It's summer. Still bedtime. You're emotionally abusive. Claire nearly fell off the porch laughing. Lily groaned dramatically, but eventually disappeared inside after one final betrayal speech about unfair parenting. The yard finally fell quiet again. Warm summer wind drifted softly through the trees while distant thunder rumbled somewhere far away. Not dangerous thunder, just background noise. Claire looked toward Ethan slowly. You know, she whispered softly. This porch feels more like home than anywhere else lately. Ethan's heartbeat stumbled slightly at that. Neither of them moved for a second. Then Claire reached over carefully and took his hand. Not dramatically, not impulsively, just gently, naturally. like two exhausted people finally admitting they didn't want to carry life alone anymore. Ethan looked down at her hand in his, then toward her. Claire's expression held nervousness, hope, fear, all at once. And honestly, he probably looked exactly the same. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Ethan smiled softly. "Yeah." And for the first time in years, he actually meant it. Across the yard, fireflies glowed softly through the summer darkness while warm porch lights surrounded them both. No giant declarations. No dramatic music. Just two lonely people slowly realizing they had become something important to each other. Claire squeezed his hand gently. Ethan squeezed back. And somewhere inside the house, Lily peeked through the living room window before grinning to herself. Because apparently even 7-year-olds could tell when two people stopped feeling alone. Outside, the neighborhood remained calm and quiet beneath the warm night sky. But inside Ethan Parker's chest, everything had changed. Not because grief disappeared, not because pain magically ended, but because sometimes life surprised people when they least expected it. Sometimes healing arrived disguised as late-night coffee, or pancake mornings, or stormy nights lit by candles. And sometimes, the person who helped you survive your darkest season ended up becoming the reason you looked forward to tomorrow again.